Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now, your host, Jason Bennett.
Hey, everyone. Excellent day today. Thank you for joining us again on another episode of Election University Podcast. I am your host, Jason Bennett. And as you can tell from the intro, I am flying solo today. Rainey is out for the week, so I am doing the interview on my own. So we will catch Rainey next week. I'm excited for today's episode. We have Dean Nielsen of Cerillion N4 Partners, a national political consulting firm that does candidate consulting across the United States. They're involved in 37 states. And they've done all levels of races from U.S. Senate all the way down to your local city council race. And we're going to learn a little bit today. We're going to get some advice and some guidance on races that are not running this year, but are interested in running in the future. So what should you be doing now? What should you be getting together now? What should you be thinking about? What should you be planning for a future run? If you're not making it on the ballot this year, but you're thinking about it for the future, this episode is for you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dean's background here. We're going to hear more about it when we talk to him in just a few minutes. But Dean is a principal at Cerillion N4 Partners, organization that he founded. And before that, he was the national political director for Progressive Majority, and he was the Washington state director just prior to that. And we're going to hear more about his background and the work that he's done nationally and what he's seeing maybe this year and in the future before 2020 in national politics. So for the folks that are out there thinking about doing this, we're going to get really hands-on, really nitty-gritty about the things that we should be doing. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. Dean Nielsen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jason. I think that this show is such a great resource for people in politics. And, thank you for putting it out there and helping bring up the next generation of Democratic and progressive activists.
Thank you so much. So let's talk a bit more about your background. In the intro, we spent a little bit of time talking about it, but I'd love it if you could elaborate more on the work that you've done and what expertise you're bringing to the table today.
Sure. So for the last 8 years, I've owned my own political consulting business. And, we're a little different than other consulting firms in that we work nationally. And, as Jason said, we've worked in 37 states across the country, but also we're not afraid to go really down ballot. A lot of the national firms, all they want to do is they want to talk to you about your congressional race, your U.S. Senate race, your governor's race, et cetera. We actually spend a lot of time working on state legislative races, city councils, county commissions, dog catchers, et cetera. And so, we've, done a lot of work in helping bring up candidates from the very first race. And a first-time candidate, is in a very unique and unusual position that the incumbents just don't have. First-time candidates oftentimes are underfunded. They don't know how to run a campaign. They don't have name recognition, and they have to build everything from scratch. And I think that the first time you run is one of the hardest things that anyone can ever do. However, for those of you who are willing to start early, there are things that you can do to make your life easier.
Yeah. So you have these two really great resources on your website, Cerillion N4 Partners website. And one of the ones that we're going to talk about today is your quick start guide to winning your election. And this is a really great, comprehensive, free resource for everyone out there. And we'll include it in the show notes so that there's a link for everyone, since Cerillion is a difficult thing to spell, not necessarily phonetic.
We're actually you can go to also cn4partners.com and it will get you there. And the 4 is a number.
Yeah, perfect.
So we developed the Quick Start Guide, and kind of the beauty of the Quick Start Guide is that there are a lot of campaign training resources out there. And we've discovered that most of them tend to be in books, right? A great organization that I used to work for, Wellston Action, they have actually 2 full books on how to run and manage a campaign. When I was a Progressive Majority, we developed one. Emily's List has a training manual. But this is all you need to know about a campaign on one sheet of paper. So if you're like me and you put together, your furniture, you put together things around your house without looking at the instructions, this is one easy place to go where you can learn a lot about campaigns all on one piece of paper without having to read a huge book.
Do you find that a guide like this is difficult to do because races are so different in very different parts? You've worked in 37 states. And do you think the same rules apply to, South Side Chicago race and rural Tennessee and San Francisco? Are we really comparing apples to apples when we're talking about the fundamentals of campaigns, or are campaigns just fundamentally different based on your jurisdiction?
Right. I think there are a lot of variations between the states. However, what I think that you should really look at is functions on the campaign, right? Whether you have a $50,000 budget or whether you have $1 million budget, you still have the same functions. You still need a campaign manager. You still need a treasurer. You still need, help with fundraising. You still need somebody to help put up your yard signs. So you still need a website, so all of the functions within a campaign are the same. And I think, even if it's a $5,000 budget, you need all of those functions. And I think the difference between a $5,000 budget and $1 million budget is, how much you pay of that you pay for, and how much of it you get your friends and family and volunteers to do or do yourself.
Right.
And so all of these things are scalable.
All right, let's drill down a bit on the scalable part.
Quick start guide here on what candidates should be doing to plan now and what they should be thinking about, what they're getting themselves into, and how to run a successful campaign. And your first section is about your message and who candidates are. And it's broken up into 4 sections: the campaign bio, the stump speech, the fundraising pitch, and the candidate photo. And I want to talk a little bit about the campaign bio specifically. I think candidates struggle with how to tell their story. So what advice would you give folks as they're trying to develop this, regardless of their budget, what they should be thinking about with their campaign bio?
Sure. I think a lot of candidates really get hung up on their resume. And you have to have some sort of resume to run for office, but it is not the only thing that you need to have for office. I think that you need to know, who you are, which is partly your resume, but it's also partly your personal story. And then you also need to know why you're running. You need to have a reason for running. And, part of, your reason for running and who you are is, stories about yourself and stories about things that you've done in the community. And, thinking about your own personal life. How many times have you started a conversation with, "You won't believe what happened to me today," or "I'm so excited, looking forward to this event coming up in the future"? And we communicate with stories. We were oral tradition thousands and thousands of years before anybody ever developed writing or resumes, thank God. And so we're very comfortable in talking in the world of stories. But I think that so many people approach running for office, here is why I'm qualified. I served for 5 years on the blah, 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 and you can just see the audience's eyes just glaze over. So, that's just not interesting to people. Nobody, listens to a politician on the radio when they're driving home and then bursts into their living room and tells their partner, "My God, Patty Murray had a great 10-point plan on the radio
Right.
today, and here's what it was." It's like, no, they say, "God, there's a really interesting person I interviewed on the radio today. And, she was running for office because some lobbyists, she tried to make a difference in her kid's school. And some lobbyists told her, 'You're just a mom in tennis shoes and you don't matter.' And that's why she's like, heck with this. And, that's really cool." So, and you just got to think about this, as a voter, as a normal person, and how we all communicate in our daily lives.
Right. So if candidates don't have the resources to develop their own personal story, how can they find resources to help develop that? How do they figure out what their story is and which one might be resonant, right? I think every person has dozens of personal stories that they could tell. How do they know which one's going to work?
Right. A couple of resources. The organization I've done a lot of work for, Wellstone Action, has some resources on their website, which is wellstone.org, named after former Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota. But also, I think that, when you're developing your story, you need to think, you could think of it as in a number of buckets, right? One is your growing up story. Another is the story of your family coming to America. Another, story you could tell is, something that's perhaps a little more contemporaneous and current to what you were running for. I'm running for school board because some, fabulous teachers and, Mercer Island High School mentored me, and they made me into the person I was today, and I was going to go on a different path, and they changed my life. So I want to be on the school board to help change other kids' paths. I mean, there's lots of different stories you can tell. And, I think, whether it works or not, I think one great thing that every candidate could and should do is try it out on your friends and family and get feedback from them and before you go out to the big scary world. So.
The next one that we want to talk about is the stump speech. Mm-hmm. And what should folks be thinking about when they develop their stump speech? We had a great episode with Eric Liu, who is a former speechwriter for President Bill Clinton, come on and talk about the elements of a stump speech. What are the mistakes that candidates are making when it comes to their stump speech?
Again, too much resume. And that, consistently is probably the number one mistake I see across the board. But I think also, it's really answering that question. Who are you and why are you running? And you have to answer that. I've seen candidates do a stump speech without telling what they're running for. Every stump speech should conclude with some sort of ask. What do you want people to do? Do you want them to vote for you? Do you want them to give you money? Do you want them to host a house party? Whatever it is. But then also, particularly if you're running against an incumbent, it's like, what sets you apart? If you're running against an incumbent, you have to answer the question, why should they fire them and elect you? And an incumbent, has been voted on by a majority of the population. So there's a certain segment of the population that you have to convince that either that person isn't who they thought they were, or, the voters thought that they were, or that they changed during their time in office. That's your two options. So you have to somehow contrast yourself with your opponent in your speech as well. And that's a lot to accomplish in 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, which is what these, forums usually give you. But it is completely doable.
So one of the things that you had mentioned in here is the mistake or the trap of thinking this is more like a job interview. But there are some elements of this, and I'm not pushing back on this too much. But I do think I do a lot of career counseling for folks as well. And one of the things that I tell folks as they're thinking about their job is it's really not about you at the end of the day. It's about how you are going to demonstrate to the employer that you fit into their ecosystem and how you're going to be a valued employee for them. It's not really about your needs and wants. It's about what the employer needs and wants and how they see themselves at the end of the interview, you and in their ecosystem. And do you feel that that's the same way with the voters, that instead of thinking about this as like a long laundry list of like how great you are and all the experience that you have, it's really more about articulating how you're going to fit into their value system or their ecosystem?
Absolutely. And I think, and I say it's not like a job interview, but to a certain extent, Jason's right. It also kind of is. But, voters know, that, when they elect somebody, they're not going to know any of the 4,000 bills that you vote on in the state legislature or the 10,000 bills you vote on in Congress or whatever it is. They're going to want to know that you have their best interest at heart. They're going to want to know that you have shared values. And, that's, really what voters are looking for. That's why endorsements are important, because an endorsement from an organization, if somebody's a committed environmentalist, they're going to look at environmentalist organizations, nods and who they endorse in that race, right? If somebody is a, huge Democrat, they're going to look toward the Democratic Party. If somebody really, really respects the governor, they're going to look and see who they endorsed. I mean, so, these are, kind of cues for people who don't want to do the research.
Right. Fundraising. You got a fundraising pitch in here. So let's talk about fundraising. It is the one thing that I think every candidate, except for the very rare ones, would agree that they hate. So this is the one task on the campaign that candidates hate doing. But why is the fundraising pitch important? Why should candidates work to perfect this?
I mean, you could think of it several ways. If you have a good fundraising pitch, you're going to be more successful raising. But I also think that if you have a good fundraising pitch, you're going to be more confident and you're going to feel more comfortable in asking people for money. If you're in a larger campaign and you're talking to lots of people, this may be the only time that you talk to that voter. So you're going to want to not only give a good pitch to raise money, but you're also going to want to give a good pitch so that that you make a good impression with that person, and that even if they don't give you money, that they'll vote for you and they'll tell other people about your campaign.
Yeah. So do you think with the increased confidence, candidates tend to want to do more fundraising, or does it alleviate their? I mean, I'm thinking about the candidates who are listening, or the future candidates out here who are listening right now, who are just like, I cannot get into it. I can't get into the fundraising. And what are some tricks that candidates can do to make this maybe a less painful experience for them?
Sure. I mean, for me personally, I found when I do more of something I don't like, it does get easier over time. So, the first call is always the hardest, right? I think that, focusing on success is also helpful. I was just working with a candidate actually in Alabama over the week that, finally the fundraising clicked in. And now, instead of doing 1 hour a day, he's moved up to 6 hours a day. And that's, largely because he saw the success. I mean, he saw the money starting to come in and he started focusing on that success. There's different ways you can do you can do it. You can measure, and I would encourage all of you candidates and particularly campaign managers out there, you have to measure this stuff. So, how many hours of call time are you doing a week? How many dials are you doing per hour? How much money is coming in per hour? And, once you start to see the progress happening, even if you don't like it, you kind of get it. And each candidate has a different hourly rate. Some people can raise $1,000 an hour. Some people can raise $50 an hour. And the more you can raise an hour, the less you have to do.
It's funny how that works. Let's talk about the candidate photo really briefly. I remember reading a study, I think it was actually at University of Washington, that they did this study, and it was basically they flashed a photo for like a second, or a fraction of a second, in front of their focus group or their test group, and they were asked to choose the winner of an election based on the photos. And there was something like an 88% correct rate just based on the photos. They didn't know about the issues. They don't know how much the candidate raised. They don't know what the polling information was about these candidates. They don't even know their backgrounds. Strictly off of the images, they were able to guess correctly who won the race based on the photo of this. So that says to me, one, scaringly, if that is a accurate study has been peer tested, it's like effective, that so much of the work that we're doing is really based on the optics of the campaign, and not enough on the issues, or not at all on the issues, as much as it is on the optics of the campaign. And two, that are very quality, photo and quality optics really matter on a campaign. Yeah. Are you in agreement with that statement? Are you familiar with that study too?
Yeah, I've seen the study. I haven't dive deep into it. Maybe I don't really want to. I don't know. It's kind of scary. But yeah, I mean, photos and quality photography is absolutely essential in politics, which is also the second resource we have on our website that's free is our photo guide, which kind of walks campaigns through how to do a photo shoot, how, what things that you should be looking for in your imagery. And I completely agree with you, Jason, is that, that this is also an area where a lot of first-time candidates, and particularly down-ballot candidates, stumble down because they find a friend that, I know somebody that has a nice camera. If you were going to spend $1 correctly, if you're going to spend money in one area of your campaign, please have good photos. And because, your photos are being seen in a voter's guide, they're being seen online, they're being seen on Facebook, they're being seen in direct mail or any other type of, campaign communications that you do. We do direct mail, and last year we did probably about 3 million pieces of direct mail. And I could tell you, I cannot make a good direct mail piece if I do not have a good picture.
Right.
It just, bad photos equals bad mail.
Right.
And there's nothing I could do to solve that. And I see people making this mistake time and time and time again. And I have this argument with all my campaigns. If you have to spend even $1,000 for a photographer, please do it.
So what's a bad photo? Just describe
Sure.
what a bad photo
Sure.
is.
I think some of it is, it when you see it, right?
Right.
But bad lighting, for example.
Like shadows on the face, and
exactly.
too much sun in the eyes.
Yeah. If and you see this a lot of times with non-professional photographers, people squinting, shadows, that type of kind of aesthetic things, but there's also kind of bad setup as well. For example, don't ever take photos and put it on mail from a candidate that is behind a podium, right? A podium creates a barrier between the candidate and the listener, but it all, which is bad, but it also puts you, into the role as a politician. Guess what? People don't like politicians.
Yeah.
And
we're not in a pro-politician era.
Right. Not at all. People like real people who are going to office for real reasons that are like you. They're looking for somebody who is like you. I think also don't be too dressed up. I think I see that mistake that people make all the time. Again, these are mistakes that big time people have made. There's a famous story about, Richard Nixon, who was always jealous of the Kennedys. And so he's like, oh, the Kennedys walked on the beach, so I'm going to go do that too. He walked on the beach in a suit. It's just insane that, and these are people playing at the highest levels. And, other mistakes people make, gentlemen, no flag ties, or ladies, if you wear ties, no flag ties. If I see them and I am near you, I will take a pair of scissors and cut them in half.
And why is that? Because they don't photograph well, or it's too busy, it's distracting.
Yeah, and it's ugly, you know, and it's, that overly patriotic look. What is it? It's the caricature of a politician. Yeah. You don't ever want to be a caricature of something.
Right.
So, you want to seem like a normal person. Normal people do not wear flag ties. They just don't. So.
Yeah. Unless you're at like a convention for one of the parties, right? Then you see all sorts of crazy get-ups.
People at conventions are not normal people.
That is true. Yeah. You and I are not normal people.
This is true.
Okay, so we've talked, I think, about the elements of beginning to define who you are. These are like the first steps of planning. You don't have to write your stump speech as a first step, but you definitely have to be thinking about the who you are and what your story is, and start thinking about these things around building your campaign. Let's talk a little bit more about the planning portions of this. What are some very easy steps if someone is listening out there and they're like, I want to do this. I'm seeing other first-time candidates stepping up and running for office. I'm not ready to do it now, but I'm ready to do it in the future. What should they be doing now to plan and get things ready for a future run?
Well, one thing you could do this year is go volunteer on a campaign in your jurisdiction. Ideally for the same office that you want to run but even if not, a separate office, like let's say you want to run for city council, but that's not up in your community this year. But state legislature is, go help that candidate. And you'll learn so much about political campaigns just from volunteering in the office. And I would try to get different experiences on a campaign, go door knocking with the candidate, volunteer to sit with them during their fundraising calls, go to a fundraising event with them. So there's a lot that you can learn just from on the ground experience by doing yourself. And, you don't have to quit your job and go, do this full time. But, I think with, if you volunteer for them 10 times between now and November, you'll learn a lot about political campaigns.
Yeah.
Hopefully you hop onto one that's well run.
Yes. And so that learning portion of it, one, I think the goal of that would be to maybe demystify some of the, things that people might be thinking about what running a campaign is like, but also maybe to save some time and energy from recreating the wheel. Is this making it more efficient by volunteering on a campaign? What are some of the...
Absolutely. You gain so much. One is that you demystify the whole process, as Jason said, but also you're meeting other like-minded people in your community that, and you're building relationships. I mean, if you show up to volunteer, you're most likely not going to be the only one volunteering that day. And you can get to know some of the other volunteers. You get to know the campaign staff if it's a large enough campaign. And you can also build some goodwill with that candidate. So they win. And then, next year when you're running, do you think they're going to support you, or do you think they're going to support your opponent who didn't volunteer on their campaign? Right. So it's a good way to start the kind of early endorsement process as well. So that's one thing you could do that I think is very easy. Several other tips, and maybe if it's a year out, it's a little too late for this. You're going to have to decide. But I encourage everybody to do some sort of community service project in your community. Whether that is, helping build a ball field, or getting books at a library, or doing something, with your local farmers market. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it gives you something to talk about on the campaign. And then therefore you become not the politician at the door looking for a vote, but you become a community leader who has accomplished real things for a community. Oh, you're the person that helped, put new turf on the soccer fields. And my kid loves to play soccer. And, that was such a great thing in our community. So one is it transforms you to a community leader, not a politician. The second thing, by doing a community service project in and of itself, it will put you into contact with other people in the community that have the same goals. For example, you might get donations from local small business to help pay for the project. You might get some press in your local newspaper about, this great thing that just happened in our community. You might bring other people together to accomplish the project who, guess what? They're all going to be your campaign volunteers and donors. So that's a great thing to do. And at the end of the day, if you don't end up running, you help make your community better too.
Right. What about like a contacts list, and what should people be thinking about in terms of developing? You talked about relationships and building networks in areas. What should people be doing? Should they be collecting business cards from people? How aggressive should they be building their list now? How about some advice on what people should be doing on their contact list?
Absolutely. And I think, mostly if your listeners are like most of us, their contact list is probably in total disarray, right? So the more that you can put some structure around a contact list, the better off you're going to be. So put it into some sort of database, and Excel is fine for this, but, name, address, if you have it, phone number, email, birth date, etc. Right. And, just start to amass that. People oftentimes say start with your Christmas card list, and that, and obviously that's a metaphor. A lot of people don't even send them out. A lot of people might not even celebrate Christmas, but the type of list that you would do in a holiday if you want to send out a card. And, who did, and then just start asking yourself questions. Who did you invite to your wedding if you got married? Who did you, who was in your high school class that you were friends with in, that period of your life? And just start inputting data. Look at your Facebook. Who are your Facebook friends? Should they be on that list? LinkedIn. Who are your LinkedIn friends? Who are people that are saved in your phone? All of those can be used to develop the list. The purpose of the list is to, when you're running for office, these are the people you're going to be calling to raise money from particularly in your early stages. Yeah. The benefit from doing it early is that you're going to see a lot of people on that list you might not have talked to in a while. Well, you can start to warm them up, send them a holiday card, send them a birthday cards, maybe go call them up and go have coffee with them. We used to be such good friends 10 years ago, but we haven't reconnected in a while. I just want to see what you're up to. Yeah. And therefore, when you call them and ask for money, you are not, you're doing it authentically. You're not somebody that was, a big part of their life 20 years ago that they haven't heard of. You have a fresh new relationship with them.
That's the area that I think when I'm working with candidates, the area that is a point of contention. I haven't talked to this person in a really long time. I feel uncomfortable asking them for money. And I say, okay, well, that's totally fine. You should put people on your list that have a positive feeling about you, that even regardless of the amount of time that you've talked to them, whenever the last time you had lunch or dinner is immaterial. What matters is, do they want you to succeed?
Yep.
Like at the end of the day, is
Yep.
this somebody who thinks positively of you and wants you to succeed? If so, put them on your list. You don't have to ask them for money necessarily. We want you to do that. We want to, ask everybody for money. But they also could volunteer on the campaign. They could come to your kickoff. They could spread the word for you. They can write letters to the editor. They could do online social media.
Sure.
They could do all sorts of things on the campaign and help you above and beyond, but you can't do it if you can't ask them, right? And you can't ask them if you don't know how to contact them.
Right.
So.
And I think that, if you think about it, would you give them money if they ran for office?
Right.
And if the answer is yes, then they go on your list immediately.
Right.
I've had candidates raise money from their high school prom dates, from ex-wives, ex-husbands, ex-whatevers.
Right.
And you would be surprised at how many people are willing to to invest in your campaign. Obviously, there's going to be some disappointments in that list too, but you don't know until you don't ask, and you aren't going to get to your fundraising goal if you don't ask. It is amazing to me, just being in politics, how many people I know who don't ask me for money.
Right.
I'll give you an example. I did a lot of work for Wellstone Action. Wellstone Action is an organization that trains candidates on how to run for office. Not one, not two, but 3 staff people from Wilson Action who I know well, who I participated in trainings across America with, ran for office. Not one of them asked me for money.
Oh,
and
that sounds like a threat. They should call you up right now and ask you for $100.
But I'd give it to them. One is on the ballot in Minnesota this year for lieutenant governor. Peggy Flanagan. So Peggy, if you're listening, you can feel free and call them and ask me for money. But no, seriously. These are people I know. I have a relationship with. We teach candidates on how to do this.
Right.
And come on, guys.
Yeah. And I always think there's this weird sort of sorting that ends up happening, I think, in candidates' minds about who they think will donate. And that's who they focus their time and energy on, right? There's a correlation in their mind of their rating system, their likelihood. They think of somebody donating, and that's the group of people that they will call. And this other group that doesn't quite make that list or is in another category then does not get asked. And that we're trying to undo that behavior essentially, because I think you have to cast a wide net when the fundraising goals are usually larger than what your capacity is. There's never enough money on campaigns, right? So we always set the goals to be larger and a little bit out of reach, so that you push yourself to get to those goals. And you're not going to get there if you don't ask every single person, right? So,
well, and going back to the list building, I'll give you a story. Barack Obama, and this is years before he ran for president, years before he was in the U.S. Senate. So this is in the 90s. A woman named Nan Aron is fantastic, runs a great organization in Washington, D.C., that focuses on legal issues in the judiciary. She raises her money largely by going to law firms and giving little pitches at lunch or, dinner in the conference room type of thing. And so she went to a law firm in Chicago, gave her spiel, got some money from the senior partners, blah, blah, blah. And she's kind of a one woman show, doesn't travel with staff, whatever. And she's getting ready to leave. And she's telling me this story. She's getting ready to leave and she can't find the sign-in sheet. And she's looking around for the sign-in sheet. And there's a young attorney that was in the back photocopying the sign-in sheet to get all the contact information. And that was Barack Obama.
Oh.
And, so you have people that have ascended to the highest levels in politics and government that are doing the exact same thing that you as a new candidate have to do.
Right. Which is collect as much information as you can and put it someplace centralized, right? Some database, something. Mm-hmm. Okay. So moving into the home stretch here, let's think about building your campaign team and thinking about your jurisdiction that you're running for office, other things to be thinking about in these planning stages. Yeah. So I have a number of candidates who are I want to run for office someday. I want to make a change in my community, and they're altruistic. They're not doing it for the power or the fame and the adulation that comes with running for office. They're really interested in public service, but they don't know where to run. And there's usually a challenge in figuring out the right jurisdiction and the timing of that. So, and candidates sometimes will be willing to move into a jurisdiction, a particular jurisdiction to run if they have a better chance of winning there, or have a faster timeline than, say, an area where there are lots of candidates, lots of interest. what do you recommend for candidates when they're thinking about jurisdictions, like where they should run and what are the considerations that candidates should be thinking about in the planning stages?
I mean, I've worked with a lot of candidates that move jurisdictions, and I've pulled on it a number of times. And I've been on both sides of that equation. I've both had an opponent that moved in, and I've had my candidate move in. And it's very interesting in that it doesn't really bother voters. They don't really care that much. So the whole, oh, you're a carpetbagger, accusation doesn't have much salience at voter level. I think where it does hurt candidates, if they do it too quickly before running for office, is that you don't have those authentic connections in that community. And, if you live in a community for a long time, you build up trust, you build up relationships just by the nature of being there. So it's one thing if you're going to move, 3 blocks over into a jurisdiction, who cares, right? But if you have a more substantial move, it might take you more time to build up those connections. And the connections only help you, right? These are people that, the coffee shop you go to every day, they'll put your sign in your window. They might host a little event after hours, those sorts of things, those community connections that you can draw on only by living in that community.
Do you think that candidates should consider running in areas where they don't necessarily fit their value system? So, for example, I usually say this as an kind of a bizarre example, but an example nonetheless. I'm gay. I'm openly gay. I can't go run in an area that would be hostile to openly gay candidates, for example. More rural area, deep south, other areas like that would be not a wise move. Do you agree with that statement, or do you think that those sorts of considerations don't really matter if I have roots in the community?
I think that this is something that's changing. And, I think Americans are becoming more accepting of folks from other, backgrounds, races, religions, sexual orientations, etc. I think that your community best. And, all of that being said, if you have to be something that you're not, I don't really recommend it, because I really believe in what I call the politics of authenticity. And I think that's, and you see this both on the left and the right. Senator Paul Wellstone on the left was very authentic. On the right, like him or hate him, Donald Trump is very authentic. He says everything that comes into his mind. And, like it or not, people knows what he's thinking, at least at that particular moment. It might change in 5 minutes, but there is a certain authenticity to that, and people know when they're being snowed, you know, and be authentic and true to who you are, and I think you'll be far more successful than if you're not.
It drives me crazy when people say that Donald Trump is authentic, because how does somebody who lies 3,000 times in a year is the more authentic person running for office?
Yeah, well.
Drives me crazy.
But he's not slick. He's not polished. He's not poll tested. I mean, like in Donald Trump's run for the presidency, they didn't take a single poll until the general election. Throughout the entire primary process, not a single poll. And it's that poll testing stuff that, one, is powerful, but is also like, I think that we as practitioners can take it too far. And where you have these candidates talking about things that they don't know anything about or believe in. I mean, that's where, the science, quote unquote, of politics, really gets, trumped, so to speak, by, the behavioral science. If somebody's up there, saying some poll tested message that really has nothing to do with why they're running for office, who they are as a person, or even that they don't know anything about that issue, people see right through it. And I think this is one of the challenges that Hillary Clinton had, that she would, spout off these poll tested, pabulum that, people just knew that, that wasn't her, and that's not why she was running.
Yeah. As a longtime Hillary supporter, I would say that I often longed for the real Hillary to come out on the campaign trail. I think many of the supporters did.
Al Gore had the same issue.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking about the jurisdictions, then the one follow-up that I have to that question is then, does that mean then if you are an authentic Democrat with roots in the community, you can win anywhere?
No.
Okay, why not?
Because just like I probably will never vote for a Republican in a contested race, unless something is seriously wrong with the Democrat. So too, there are people on the other side that are like that. And, it's like, I'll give you an example. Sarah Palin. If I was living, or if she was living in my jurisdiction, she can come over every night and bring me, dinner. I will never vote for her, ever. And, that's true in other parts of America too, that there are communities that are just so Republican and so conservative that, they're never going to vote for a Democrat. And that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. It exists on both sides.
Do you think that, like Doug Jones, the Democrat who won in Alabama for the U.S. Senate race, and these 43 legislative districts that have flipped from some of them in very deep Trump country are changing that, or are they exceptions to the rule?
Well, I think Doug Jones is a unique case, given who his opponent was. I mean, if he had beaten a more normal Republican, I'd be like, okay, let's talk. I would say, and that exists, right? You can beat people in flawed areas. I argue that the list of targets should be far wider than those at the national level believe. I think we should be running competitive candidates in far more places. That being said, you are not going to elect a Republican in Seattle ever. You are not going to elect a Republican, in Newark, New Jersey ever. You're not going to, there are things that just aren't going to happen. So I think that, San Francisco, right? You think these deep blue areas, there are deep red areas. So I would say, there's the super deep red areas, but I think there's that next tier of area. And, I'd include Alabama in that. I mean, like some of those, deep South states, Mississippi's 40% African American, right? African Americans are voting 90% plus for Democrats, right? Yeah. So you start off with a huge, segment of the vote right there. Now, can you get the next 10%? Well, that's the hard part. But, 40% is not the Republican vote in Seattle. Republican vote in Seattle is about, 15 or 10%. Right?
Yeah.
So, if you're in a community that a Democrat could get 35, 40, 45% in, yeah, go for it. If you're in a community where the Democratic candidates are regularly getting 20%, stick a fork in it.
Fair. Okay, good. So when you're thinking about the legislative districts or the jurisdictions that you're running in or the city councils, you really want to look to the history and the performance of candidates who are like you in that jurisdiction to see if you even have a shot at doing this.
Oh, and there's an exception to every rule. And one of the exceptions is nonpartisan races, right? If you want to run for something that you're not saddled or burdened by a party label that is unpopular in your area, then that changes the equation dramatically.
Yeah.
There's lots of, Democrats elected to city councils and vice versa. Republicans elected to city councils in Democratic areas. And that, and people, and voters see things like city councils and school boards in a far more nonpartisan way than we partisans see them.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense for thinking about where you should run. Any other tips on the planning stages for folks? What other tools should they be pulling together? Should they be thinking about their team? Should they be thinking about kitchen cabinets? Should they be thinking about other resume building things like joining boards and commissions? What other advice would you give folks?
All of the above.
All the above.
Politics is fundamentally a relationship business, right? And the more relationships you have in your community with, across the board with community leaders, with voters, with, different segments of your community, the better off you're going to be. Paul Tooze, who ran Obama's election in Iowa in 2008, and fantastic political operative, once told me that politics is basically a game of list building. You have list of donors, you have list of voters, you have email lists, you have all sorts of lists, right? List of campaign prospects, et cetera, list of endorsements. And he said, politics is simple. The people who have the biggest list at the end win.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of truth to that. But they also have, just having lists on, names on a list doesn't do anything for you. They have to have a connection to you. So when you go back to preparing to run for office, one of the bigger mistakes I see people make is they join every organization in the community. And, people know when they're being bullshitted.
Right.
It's like they know when somebody's doing that. And so if you are just joining an organization to pad your resume before running for office and you show up twice and never come again, people get that. They know that they see right through it. How many politicians do you see come to an African-American church the Sunday before the election,
right,
and hustle them for votes? That's not an authentic relationship, right? So, and I encourage people to, really work on that base building, work on building authentic relationships in those communities, and figure out ahead of time which communities are important to you. If the student vote is important to you, well, get connected to, students in your nearby university. If it's the African American vote, get connected with that community. But figure out which communities are going to be important to you winning and build an early, long, and deep relationship with them.
Excellent. Final question. Advice that you want to give first-time candidates. If you could look back on all of your races and think about the advice that you would give them at the beginning, looking back on their campaigns, what advice would you give them?
I would say that, be bold, start early, be prepared, come in with an open mind, and also really come in, knowing what a campaign is, knowing how hard you're going to have to work, get buy-in from your friends and family, in your work, so that you can do this. We see so many candidates that come in and think that this is going to be a 10-hour a week thing or a 20-hour a week thing. And a campaign is all consuming. And, if you do it right, hopefully you'll only have to be all consumed maybe once. But knowing what it is, being prepared, and, hit the ground running.
Yeah, that's great. Dean Nielsen of Cerillion N4 Partners, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great advice. I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Another big thank you to Dean Nielsen of Cerillion N4 Partners, a national political consulting firm that helps candidates up and down the ballot win their races. Dean, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise on what prospective candidates can be doing now for their future runs, whether it's 2019 or 2020 or even somewhere way far off into the future, what candidates can be doing now, what they should be doing now to help get ready for a future run. And thank you to our listeners for joining us on another episode. We are so happy to announce that we are downloaded in 35 countries and in all 50 states. And we are working so hard here to try to make sure that this is a product that you, the listeners, enjoy and also are getting a lot of use out of. So please continue to leave us comments and ratings and reviews and suggestions on topics and listeners that you want to, or speakers that you want to hear from. Keep that up. We love it, and we definitely are responding to your requests. We really appreciate you taking the time. If you have a suggestion that you want to share with us, or you think we should have a particular topic that has not yet been covered, email us, podcast@electionu.com. On behalf of Rainey Cohen and myself, thank you for joining us, and we will catch you next week. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.